I often get asked, what's my motivation for making these videos about non duality or doing these live talks about non duality? And I can understand the question because oftentimes it's said that non duality gives you nothing or teaches you nothing. You get nothing out of this. So if that's the case, then what's the point of even doing these types of videos? It's a great question. But to start, I just want to thank you for clicking on this video if you're watching it after the fact, or if you're just jumping on, join us live. Start a few minutes after the scheduled time just to make sure that people maybe forgot about it can remember, oh, so I don't miss this important first part. So I just want to welcome everyone for joining. And obviously, we're going to talk about non duality in this live chat. So if you have any questions, comments, throw that up in the chat and I will get to it most likely at some point or not. But I do encourage your participation. It makes this more enjoyable. And if you have not yet subscribed, you may not understand the purpose of subscribing, but for my purposes that you may not care about, my desires, what I seek at this point, what I think is that I'd like to get up to 1,000 subscribers so then I can do these live talks wherever I want to do them on my mobile phone. And then I don't have to necessarily sit in the corner and use a cooler and an old Huggies diaper box for a stand. So, without further ado, what is my motivation? What is my non dual motivation for doing these talks and making videos? Well, it all started one day. No, I think when it comes to non duality, people don't like talking about stories or the past because that's somehow, buying into the idea of the separate self and the idea of the individual personal story. But that's I've said this in many other meeting or in many other discussions. That's what people are looking for. They like stories. That's how we create meaning culturally as a community through mythology or storytelling. And so that's just one of the things we do as human beings. It's all natural. So I guess really, I think the initial stages of my introduction to non-duality is just those moments growing up where you have this sense of uh, peace that kind of comes over you in moments that don't necessarily even make sense to have those types of feelings, where there's just an understanding that everything is as it should be and everything will be fine as it goes. And that's kind of the mental interpretation of that sense. And so that's kind of the initial, feeling of freedom, of this openness of what non duality is pointing to. And I think what really hit home for me, Russ Rapp, this guy, was in college when I took a small group communication class, and my teacher, professor named Sheila, brought into the discussion the teachings of the Enneagram, the 9-pointed symbol that people often use for personality typing and understanding human dynamics, human nature, our the way our personality ego structures operate, change. how they're stable, the habits that we do. And in learning and reading about that, I've came to see how a lot of what I was attached to, what I identified with as a personality, as an ego, was just a script that I was playing out, just a caricature of what I thought was real. And so it was one of those times in my life where it was really kind of a wake up to recognizing that who I believe myself to be isn't necessarily that. So I think that was a big part of the path or the journey for me in going down this rabbit hole of non-duality. And Sheila, since that time, we'd met after college a few times and had coffee or tea and talked about other things. And so she actually got me into, she suggested a couple of things to look into. And I think Tony Parsons' videos were one of them, and Course in Miracles and some other things. So I think Sheila was really the um, inspirational motivation for getting into these topics. And so then the question is, why do I make these videos? Why do I do live talks? What was my initial motivation for doing this? And the funny thing is, my most viewed video is best method to experience non-duality or achieve non-duality. And that was my very first video. And I did not get into this because all of a sudden I was this non-person, this initiated, this guru status of everything in my life is perfect compared to others. However you want to define that. I think you know what I'm talking about. It was, I want to talk about non-duality. I watched videos and read a little bit on the subject and was interested in it. I didn't get very far into learning about kind of the Eastern philosophies of Advaita, Vedanta, that sort of thing. Some of those teachers, I got the Rachel Hollis meme Instagram post version of some of that. The stuff you put on a coffee cup or a t-shirt. And so that's how I was interested in the topic and got into making these videos because why not? The beauty of non-duality is it's something that we all experience, that we all are a part of. And so no one teacher or speaker is somehow elevated above another. And so there's no degree or no background or experience that you can cling to say that I'm somehow more positioned to speak on this subject. And that's not to say that some people are better at speaking on this or pointing, giving pointers, um, pointing out the duality that we do believe, the ego structures that are in place, and showing the illusory nature of that. There's speakers that are better at telling stories or connecting with others. So I don't have any illusions to the idea that there are better orators than me. But I like doing these types of chats because it is a way to practice public speaking in a free form way where I can talk on a subject that I enjoy and also practice not saying ums and making repetitive statements or talking in circles, which I sometimes do, or babbling. And so that's one thing I enjoy about doing these talks. And so you may be thinking at this point, if you're still watching this video 10 minutes in, what is the point of this discussion? And I think the point I would make to it is, oftentimes people think that I have to watch this particular speaker or listen to this person because they have something that I do not. And so I'm dispelling the myth that any one of these non-dual speakers have anything more or have any more non-dual street cred than you. Anyone listening to this, to the sound of my voice, can make a non-dual video, and you may be good at speaking or poor at speaking, or you're maybe just making statements that are not, you know, saying the same things that I'm saying about non-duality. But when it comes to the topic, the definition or the concept of it is not necessarily necessary for the truth of non-duality. And so when I made that first video, I did a lot of takes. I think I pretty much wrote out the script, had it somewhat memorized, and did many takes. It was not necessarily enjoyable. See, there you go. I was not relaxed, and to a large extent, I was not in a state of bliss. I was not, and that's where I I find it fun. And it's, if this is what people are experiencing, that's great. But I think it's fun when, um, I think there's this belief or assumption of a belief that you have to act or behave in a certain way that, um, expresses what non-duality is supposedly teaching. Where, it's like, oh, everything is nothing, and there is no person, and I just, oh, the world is just alive, and it's just a feeling, and there's just, oh, oh, there's this, but it's nothing. I just, oh, everything just so real and alive, and the walls and the dresser. Oh, it's magical, but it's not magic, because it's what is. It's aliveness. That kind of a thing. There's probably the sense of that, especially when you get into this topic. I think that's maybe a reaction that can apparently happen, but it's not, doesn't necessitate that to be, to somehow validate non-duality. You don't have to act in a certain way or believe something. And so I made the first video, and it ended up getting the most views out of all the videos I made. It's a little bit of a clickbait video in a sense, but that's kind of what non-duality is, because you go into it with the seeking, with these desires, with these goals or wants to, you know, quiet your mind or find peace, or, have some sort of epiphany. And that ends up being the thing that, someone is seeking. And from that point on, I made more videos. The intention was to make kind of, the anti non-duality video, which is a lot of times, some of these talks are just long, drawn out, uh, monologues about, you know, saying some somewhat cliche statements, or just telling stories, or just staring into the camera blankly with mouth, slightly parted. Like there's nothing that I need or want. Everything in this moment is perfection. It's peace. I have to seem that I don't even want to talk, but words just seem to fall out of my mouth. So you got that. Whether that's genuine or not, I don't know. Where was I going with that? Oh, yeah. So my intention originally was to make more concise, shorter videos um, that would maybe engage people more, get people to watch them more versus what non-dual videos that are long and drawn out that don't get to the point, that kind of meander like the ones that I do now. Because YouTube recognizes certain types of videos better than it does others, and I don't think the algorithm recognizes these types of talks and puts them out in front of people comparatively. So I just look at these videos compared to some of the ones I just make, and I get way less views typically. You may be asking yourself, why is a non-dual speaker concerned about getting views on YouTube? Well, that just brought us back to the topic at hand. What's my non-dual motivation? So why do I keep making these videos or doing live talks? So I don't make as many videos anymore because um, I get this at this point in my life. I prefer just kind of sitting down. Maybe I've had a few ideas pop into my head that I want to talk about, and just letting it flow, not worrying about having to speak in a perfect way, or get my point across in a way that you know keeps people engaged. But why do I make videos about non-duality when there's no point? What am I trying to get out of this? What am I trying to do? Because I'm a self-proclaimed non-guru, and if I'm teaching nothing, why do I talk about this subject? It's a great question. I think I can make some assumptions of my motivations. I can really dig deep and kind of self analyze. I think part of it is I find it a way to potentially help others or help myself through this process of creating more self awareness, more compassion. Um, and if people can relate to this, then I think that is something that, can create that connection, can make people feel less alone. Um, I think, and I mentioned this in a couple of recent talks, is, I like the idea of non duality as a mirror, because it does a great job of being able to hold up a mirror to your assumptions and help you to see them for what they are. So that is a potential function that I see can be utilized from non-duality, but that doesn't change anything about the actual truth of it, or the concept in the way that I describe non-duality, because non-duality isn't an experience or something that you can obtain or a state that you can be in. It's a description of reality, a description of um, what is, I guess. The groundless ground. So if you think about it like this, No, I was not frozen there. That was called a extended pregnant pause. A delayed gratification in the discussion. But when it comes to why I make these videos or why you watch videos or try to learn about non-duality, there's a seeking nature there. And if what you're seeking is to somehow be released from uh, yourself, to quiet your mind, to rid yourself of thought, or um, become a non-person, whatever it is, whatever it is you're seeking in that realm, the easiest way to understand the non-experiential nature of non-duality, the non-state of non-duality, is that in the question of itself contains the answer. And so when you ask, how can I get rid of my thoughts, or what is it that I can do to have this final awakening, this enlightenment of non-duality? If there is a guru or a person that is speaking about non-duality that somehow is perceived to have something or have achieved the pinnacle or reached the summit, yet you yourself are asking the question, if you yourself are witnessing the thoughts, the questions, the lack of understanding, then that aspect of non duality is not real. Meaning, if you aren't that, then the guru is not that. Because it's an all or nothing statement, it's an all or nothing concept. And so, what happens after awakening? What happens after you become a non dual master or enlightenment? This. So, just to put it more concretely, if you see Russ Rapp as this person that has something that you don't, if I'm somehow non-dual and you're seeking non-duality through your seeking, through your thoughts, it proves the fact that it has nothing to do with that, and that I am not somehow different than you in my nature. And maybe you're thinking to yourself right now, well, you're really being obtuse, so you're not explaining this very well, and you probably have a valid point. But so many times it becomes a discussion of me, like, how can I obtain this? How can I get this? And so that seeking energy, that desire comes from the perception that others have reached that, others have that. And so then it's, how do I get that? It's all about me. And if you're still struggling with that, then what non-duality is talking about, not to the illusion of separation, then the perception that you're having of others is an illusion, is incorrect. Am I making sense here? So your struggle, your frustration with this proves that lack of struggle or frustration is just the same. It's a duality. It's the other side of the coin. It's your perception of others that is mistaken, because non-duality is not two, meaning that there isn't someone that is somehow raised above, elevated, or somehow at a different status than you. And maybe this is just common sense. You're like, duh, I get it. But I think a lot of people that, the questions I get, or just the things that I've observed, in other comments or questions on this in this area of non-duality, it's a lot of the same questions over and over again. How do I get this? How do I get mental clarity? How do I quiet the mind? How do I stop end desire or suffering? How do I end pain? How do I achieve non-dual awareness? What's the best method to achieve or to experience non-duality? That's what people are seeking. And so if you're asking someone to achieve that, the question alone is the proof that the question itself is irrelevant. Well, let me say it a different way. So if we're seeking something or we desire or want something, we create a duality of having and not having, or wanting and not getting. And that's, happens typically over a course of time. And so I really want to eat a hamburger. I really want to become a non-person. I really want this relationship. I really want to not have all these thoughts. I really want to pass that test or get that job. It's just like, there's that pregnant pause in between the action and the consequence, cause and effect. There's that space between those things. And so it's oftentimes in the realm of the 3D separate self, uh, we perceive that void between wanting and getting to be empty space, to literally be nothing, a void essentially. And so we want to fill that desire. We want to achieve what we seek. And so we suffer in knowing that we are not whole or complete. And so we want to have something because we are lacking. Um, the flip side of that is seeing the completion or the wholeness in and of itself of reality is kind of the dualistic mentality of that. And so we define that space between wanting and getting, achieving what we seek, as nothing or not important. We give it no meaning. And so we fill that void with some sort of story that we tell ourselves, meaning, if I get that job, then I will be happy. Or if I you know meet Mr. Right, or the woman of my dreams, I will be fulfilled. He or she will complete me. And so we fill the void, or the perceived void, between that dualism, that separation, and we create the connection between that. We make up meaning to fill that gap, to bridge the perceived disconnection between the object of our seeking and our lack thereof. And so, in that kind of metaphor, non duality is pointing to the illusion of the void and saying that the connection already exists. There is no void, there is no separation between what it is we seek and the lack thereof. And when it comes to the arena of non duality, we oftentimes it's kind of the anti-seeking that appears to happen, meaning when there's a recognition of the seeking and the struggle of that, then there becomes this belief or desire to not seek. So I recognize the problem, seeking, and now my goal, what I want to achieve, is not seeking, not desiring. So I don't want to have this emotion, I don't want to have this desire or want. I don't want to feel like I'm lacking. And so the goal in and of itself in that is more of the same belief system of separation, but it's changed in a way where we no longer see it in that light. So the mind, it's another magician's trick to say that if we now can stop seeking, since we recognize seeking as the problem, desiring, whatever you want to call it, then we will somehow be complete or whole. And so it's the same, instead of saying, I want this car and then I'll be happy, it's I want this non seeking and then I'll be happy. And so we still fill that void with a story because we want to create meaning where meaning is not perceived. We want to fill the void essentially. Nature abhors a vacuum. But what non duality is saying is that that separation, that void is an illusion. So the keys to the kingdom are already have already been received. So it's kind of like the idea of, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. We've eaten from the tree of knowledge of separation, and now we believe in that separation. And so now we're apart from each other and apart from God. And yet, even in that apparent separation, there is the ultimate eternal love that always connects us, that we may try to disprove or downplay or just outright not believe, because as a separate self, it's, I would say, maybe impossible for us to perceive the non-self. And so how do we bridge that gap as human beings? It's through things like love, faith, hope. And a lot of those are, like, hope is something that happens over time. It's kind of like a fulfillment of desire. It's like if you watch the second Matrix, the architect talks about hope being the greatest strength of humanity and the biggest weakness at the same time. So, if you can see time the way it is and you say, I want that car, and then there's this gap, this void, and then you get this car, that happens over time. So the gap is seen through time, through moments passing. So I will achieve that through time passing. But with life, there's always this sense of non fulfillment because once we get the car that we always wanted, we still feel the lacking. We still feel this need of connection, this desire to be fulfilled, this desire to be happy, if you want to call it that. And so it never ends, it's perpetual. And it's kind of the impossibility of the self seeing beyond itself. It's the idea of trying to be nothing as something, the contradiction of it all. So we find forgiveness through faith. So we get on our knees and confess our sins. And we say to God, please forgive me. I know not what I do. I need you, God. Please forgive me. Seek and ye shall find. The keys to the kingdom are already yours. Even if you stumble through life, if you mumble your words, the clarity of that, the life-changing nature of that is still true. So even if I'm an imperfect messenger of this message of non-duality, it matters not. And so we often focus so much on the messenger or the how the message is portrayed versus seeing the truth of the idea itself. So it becomes a focus on how can I be like that person? How can I live a life like that person? Or, is that really true? How do I get to the deep meaning of non-duality and really understand it intellectually? And oftentimes the move towards the mind, towards the intellect, is the habitual nature that we're used to. And it's just more of the same. Whereas maybe the truth can be found in other ways through the body or through meditation, but it's not needed because whether you're stressed out or relaxed or feeling like you're lacking something, the splinter in the mind, the truth of non duality is still ever present. It never changes. The forms appear to change, but the circumstances stay the same. The circumstances of what is. To the separate self, that can seem like a prison. That can seem like I'm being controlled. I want free will. There is no fate because how can I not be in control of my life? You know, we're underground in the matrix. We're in the real world, but we use machines to keep us alive. They clean our water and produce air that we breathe. Well, yes, but we control them, says Neo. Well, how do you mean? Well, we can destroy them, we can shut them off. The separate self wants to be in control. And so the perception of being a non-self is uncomfortable because it points to the weakness of the ego, of the body. And if you think about how big the universe is and the sun, the power of the sun, the power of the ocean, of the weather, of all these forces outside of our realm of control, we're just tiny little specks on a huge earth in an even larger solar system, in a giant galaxy, in a seemingly infinite universe. And we think that if we can rely on this body mind mechanism, that we can somehow find peace and be in control. And the absurdness of that is the cosmic joke. So where do we find strength? Where do we put our focus? Reminds me of Romans 8 in the Bible, chapter 8, verses 1 through 17. And this is life through the Spirit. And so I read this the other day, and it kind of reminded me a lot of non-duality talks and how it kind of there's a lot of back and forth, and um, you'll see after I read it here. But I think it's maybe we'll discuss it after I read it. So this is Romans 8 verses 1 through 17. life through the Spirit. Therefore, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, because through Christ Jesus, the law of the Spirit of life set me free from the law of sin and death. For what the law was powerless to do, in that it was weakened by the sinful nature, God did by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful man to be a sin offering. And he condemned sin in sinful man in order that the righteous requirements of the law might be fully met in us, who do not live according to the sinful nature, but according to the Spirit. Those who live according to the sinful nature have their mind set on what the nature desires. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their mind set on what the Spirit desires. The mind of a sinful man is death, but the mind controlled by the Spirit is life and peace. The sinful mind is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so. Those controlled by the sinful nature cannot please God. You, however, are controlled not by the sinful nature, but by the Spirit, if the Spirit of God lives in you. And if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, he does not belong to Christ. But if Christ is in you, your body is dead because of sin, yet your spirit is alive because of righteousness. And if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies through his Spirit who lives in you. Therefore, brothers, we have an obligation, but it is not to the sinful nature to live according to it. For if you live according to the sinful nature, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live. Because those who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. For you did not receive a spirit that makes you a slave again to fear, but you received the spirit of sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his glory. So that was, after I read that, I just recognized how, there's the duality of living a life through sin and a life through Christ, and of life and death, and kind of this back and forth that oftentimes in non-dual discussions we find ourselves stuck in, I guess. But someone that would read this from the separate self perspective, when it says the mind of a sinful man is death, but the mind controlled by the Spirit is life and peace. So then they would focus on this controlled aspect of it, because the apparent, the lie of Satan, if you will, is the illusion that if you give in to sin, that you're somehow free, that you're somehow uh, living a life of according to your desires, do what thou wilt, that sort of mentality. But it's kind of like the idea of selling your soul to the devil, signing the contract of Satan. It's not freedom. God is freedom. Satan and the devil and the sinful nature of separation is essentially the opposite of freedom. It is slavery. Through God, we have freedom. Through Satan, we have death. So that in itself is a duality. So what's the non-dual perspective on that? The non-dual perspective is that Satan is a liar. Satan is an illusionist. Satan is a magician that dupes us, that makes us believe in things that aren't real, that makes us give our power over to him, to sign the contract with the devil. It's the illusion, the trickster, the serpent, the snake. It's like the story of the lady that invited the snake into her house because it was sick or something, and took care of it. And then at the end of the story, it's a really good story, but at the end, the snake bites her, and she realizes that the venom's gonna eventually kill her in a short time. And the snake was like, "You knew I was a snake when you brought me in." So oftentimes when it comes to the contracts, when it comes to the deception of the illusory Satan, in a sense, the biggest, the greatest trick that Satan pulled was convincing people that he doesn't exist. And in a sense, it's kind of both true and not true. Where Satan exists, but Satan has no power. And so, how does Satan get power? Through you giving it your power to him. So it's the idea that it's the there's in a sense where you can be deceptive, but you also have to tell the truth, because the idea of the vampire, this is a good kind of short example of how the satanic system operates. It's the idea of a vampire that comes to your door. The vampire can't come in and kick down your door and attack you and suck your blood and turn you into another vampire or whatever. But you have to let the vampire in. So there's like this set of rules when it comes to that you have to give into it. So it's kind of like a karma thing that a lot of the witchcraft and everything that goes along with it has to be of the free will. Otherwise, the contract is null and void. So you have to basically um, give yourself over to it in order that it may control you, in the sense that we don't want to be controlled through all the false promises of happiness and you know sex and money and whatever else you desire, fame. So it convinces you that that's what you want and that's what you're going to get from it. But it also states that, hey, you're giving up your sovereignty, your free will, your liberty, your life essentially. And so you going into it willing to sign the contract, but not realizing that it wasn't exactly what you thought it was. So is Satan real? In a sense. Is God real? Yes. That's to put it simply. That basically covers what I wanted to discuss today. I know through YouTube, I don't know how many views I'll get after the fact, but if, I guess the idea is, other than wanting to have 1,000 followers so then I can not sit here in the corner, I can go places and do these whenever I want. Because I enjoy the live chats oftentimes more than doing a produced video. Except I don't know how the chats work when it comes to doing it on your phone, because that's a pretty small screen. But that's neither here nor there. But it's been really quiet on the chats tonight. It's not even nighttime. It's whatever time it is for you, I guess, whenever you're watching this. But it's the morning for me still. So, any questions or comments? If you watch this whole thing, that would be pretty amazing. If you got something out of this, that's great. If you didn't, that's also great. Yeah, I just wonder, what's my motivation? Will my motivation change? I feel like I've gotten this message across so many times except the mind likes to play tricks continuously. So it's something that can be stated over and over again because oftentimes we continue to forget, we continue to fall asleep. And I think the biggest thing, I don't even think I mentioned this. This was kind of my main point of this whole video. I didn't think I mentioned it. I think me as a person, as a personality that still exists in that sense, I'm kind of a contrarian. So if non-duality doesn't teach anything or give you anything, it's something that I am interested in teaching. And just pointing out how we fall into other traps in every single concept that we try to understand. Well, Nathaniel Peterson, welcome, Nathaniel. Nathaniel says, I just dropped. Was hoping you could summarize what you just said, laugh out loud. Oh, just dropped in. Yeah, so that's the long and short of it. It was super long-winded, Nathaniel. So, if you have trouble sleeping at night, or if you want to take a long jog on the treadmill or whatever, you have some time that you want to spend, you can go through and listen. It's probably, since I'm fairly monotone in this setup, it's probably something that can help relax you. But I suppose you wouldn't want to listen to it when you're trying to run because you want something more upbeat. But I guess to summarize what I was saying is I kind of went in the backstory of what my experience with was of getting on to making these videos. And ultimately it comes down to, you know, I think my motivation, there's probably some personal drives to help others or help myself. But I think more than anything, I just, you know, my, how I'm hardwired is to seek the truth. How it's in my nature to try to dispel illusions or falsehoods. Um, I'm a type 5 on the Enneagram, but more than anything, I'm kind of a contrarian. So I always like to look at the flip side. I always like to see the other perspective and see it from the context of a whole perspective of a topic. So instead of necessarily just believing or trying to look into one side, I like to understand the duality, the both sides, to see how they connect and build that bridge. And so when someone says you can't really understand, there's no point in teaching non-duality because there's no one there to receive the message and then there's no one speaking it, then that draws me into it, I think, because I'm a contrarian and I like to do things what people say that can't be done. But do I really understand my motivation? I don't know. Will I continue to do these? I don't know. There may be an endpoint at some point in the near future, but like my sort of goal right now is just to get enough followers where I can do this wherever I want and not have to sit on the floor or, you know, create a makeshift area to do this. That's the story and I'm sticking to it. We got probably about 5 more minutes. I was going to do about an hour today. So, any other questions, comments? Otherwise, I'll just sip my tea. I'm drinking sweet and spicy, I think it is. Tastes pretty good. But like I said before, the reason why I wanted to make this video is because oftentimes I get asked that question of why do you even do this in the first place? What's the point? What's your motivation? What's your drive? Because the assumption is that you shouldn't have a passion, you shouldn't have desires, you shouldn't have motivation, because that is just more seeking. And non-duality says that's an illusion, so we shouldn't seek. And it's just the misinterpretation of non-duality, essentially thinking that we have to be non-seekers or non-passionate, impassionate. We have to sit there and stare like a with our dull cow eyes, with our mouth gaped open, in some sort of perpetual, uncaring, disinterested stare. And that somehow gives us credibility. Or it's, you know, the idea that, oh, this is so amazing. It's like, okay, well, yeah, it is amazing. And it's also super mundane. And I read from Romans 8, verses 1 through 17 in the Bible. Because I know people of the non-dual ilk probably shy away from religion or views outside of a certain ideology. And so I think I fill the void of that when it comes to offering a different perspective than others potentially. At least that's my assumption. So that did that about cover it, Nathaniel? You got the Cliff's Notes version. Nathaniel says, I think there is a lot to learn from the Bible, but I think a lot of it goes over people's heads. Yeah, I think that's it's a good analogy to that is, when you're a kid, and it's even worse today. Well, I wouldn't say worse, but it's just so much more obvious now that it's hard to have it go over your heads. But I think back in the day when you hear songs in the radio or pop music, and they would be making sexual suggestive references in their lyrics, you would sing it as a kid and not really know, you know, what they're talking about. And it wasn't until you got older and more mature or more worldly or experienced that you realize, you look back, oh wow, I was singing a song about whatever topic. I had no idea. So I think that's a lot of the experience of the Bible, especially if you grew up learning it. As you pick out some of the stories and you have a basic understanding of certain things, but as you grow older and mature, you can look at it from a different perspective, and it's just amazing looking at it after getting into this whole idea of non-duality and seeing all the things that point to the same types of things that you wouldn't even necessarily recognize prior to that. So there's so much there that we can unpack and learn from, that really doing a deep dive, or really doing a deep um, reading on the Bible, and researching the meanings and the history. It's like with anything, though. It's like with the Enneagram. When I learned the Enneagram, I dove in pretty deep. And when you get into most people, I noticed that weren't as interested in the topic, would maybe figure out what their type was, and that's basically it. And like, if that's all the farther you go, it's just like kind of feeding into this idea of, oh, I'm a number. And you don't really get that much out of it. So it's the same thing with the Bible, I guess. Let's see. Nathaniel says, have you watched Jordan Peterson's biblical series on YouTube? It's like 30 plus hours, but definitely worth a watch. I have not. Um, I have not. But it sounds interesting for sure. So there's a plug for if anyone else is watching this. Jordan Peterson's biblical series on YouTube. I've not watched it, so I cannot endorse it, but it sounds pretty cool. So there you go. All right. Anything else, Jordan, Nathaniel, before we close up here? Any last comment you want to make? You got the floor. You're the only one making comments today. What's your nugget of wisdom? Not to put you on the spot, no pressure. Can't figure out what your picture is. All right. Take us out, Nathaniel. Here we go. Nathaniel Peterson says, for those who are interested, it's called The Psychological Significance of the Biblical Stories. Awesome. That sounds pretty cool. It's a self-portrait during meditation. It's a self-portrait during meditation. What does that have to do with non-duality? Everything and nothing. Should we just keep going, do this all day? Should we just do like a 24-hour marathon? Just kidding. I'm not going to do that. Maybe someday, maybe not. Okay. I'm just going to finish my tea. All right, Nathaniel. Thanks for. Oh, what kind of tea? It's like sweet and spicy. It's has like cinnamon, I think, and sugar. I don't know. Sweet and spicy. No, it's not. Yeah, it's like cinnamon sugar or something. I don't know. Well, it probably says right here. What's from Good Earth? And the little tag says, only those who dare to fall greatly can ever achieve greatly. From Robert F. Kennedy. May he rest in peace. And with that, we will maybe or maybe not talk in the future. Thanks for joining. Till next time, peace.